on the topic of graves, ISIS seem to be crossing the US border. And yes, it's obviously very concerning. And in fact, it may well be creating a situation in the United States that is parallel to that leading up to the 9/11 attacks. And this is not my words. These are the words of many experts in anti-terror. And in fact, we'll be getting to that. So to sort of trace the threads of this story, you need to go back to this at the start of June, that Joe Biden signed an order which limited the number of migrants that can come into the country by 2,500 a day, which I ran the maths. That's almost 1 million migrants in a year. So that's still quite a lot. So it's not really limiting anything, really. And even so, you have your usual Guardian types complaining about this being aggressive for some reason. It's like, oh, you're only letting in 1 million illegal people a year. That's so aggressive. He's saying that it's going to put the lives of the migrants in danger. I would like to point out that actually the migrants are well aware of the dangers of what they're doing, and they choose to do it anyway. And so I feel like if you close your border, you're free of any moral responsibility to help them, because they have willingly made this crossing. They know what they're signing up for. They know it's dangerous because they get the equipment to do it.
Well, sadly, these are the kinds of people that employ members of the cartels to transport their female members of family, their children, over. And I think it's about a third of all women and girls that make the journey get raped. So if they're signing up for that, unfortunately, they're more than willing to put their own family members in and daughters in harm's way for a few quid on the other side of the border. And
Absolutely.
That's absolutely despicable.
Precisely because Americans, ever since the Monroe Doctrine, have been the hegemon in obviously in the world now, but since then, certainly the hegemon in the Western Hemisphere. Whenever the US does police its border effectively, there's a very rapid, quick domino effect across the whole of Central and South America, where the Mexicans all of a sudden realize that they're going to be on the hook for all of these people. So they massively shut their southern border as well. There's a bit of a domino effect. And then you're going to have fewer people making that incredibly precarious crossing across the Darien Gap in the first place. And so that actually is the more humane option, if considered purely in terms of the benefits to the migrant rather than the benefits to the host population in the United States.
Absolutely. So about this problem, in fact, it's worth pointing out, earlier in the month, there were 8 arrests. So these arrests were made in Los Angeles, New York, and Philadelphia. And these were Tajik nationals. And just in case you're not familiar with Tajikistan, many people might not be.
That borders Guatemala, doesn't it?
Not quite. So here we are. Here's Google Maps. And you may recognize a country that many Americans have been to and died in.
And Callum.
Well...
No, he's still alive.
Yeah. Afghanistan. And as we know, this whole area around here is a hotbed for Islamic extremism. And these people are likely members of ISIS Khorasan, I think it's pronounced. I'm not entirely sure.
The successor organisation that claimed credit for the attack on the military servicemen in the US, if I'm correct.
I think so, yes.
But they also, this might be, we might not know the answers, were they not also behind the recent one in Russia?
It was attributed to them, yes. Yeah. I believe that it's incredibly likely as well. Yes. And yes, so this Khorasan area, by the way, here we are. It encompasses Afghanistan, Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan as well. So people from these countries, it might be a good idea not to let them in your country. You may remember the fuss people made about Trump's Muslim ban, but yes, members of ISIS coming into your country is not good. I'm really going to go out on a limb here and say that. Yes, obviously you don't want this. And I think also the fact that New York City has now been placed on terror alert after this has happened, because of course it's going to be one of the targets, a sort of emblem of American success and wealth. And that's why it was targeted in 2001. And this is obviously something of concern, because if you live in a major American city, then you are in risk of terror attack. They arrested them in Los Angeles, New York, and Philadelphia. Those are definitely places that should be concerned because they were people on a terror watch list that had moved there, and why would they have spread out to these major cities? One only has to wonder.
There are also sizable Muslim enclaves that have been exposed as hotbeds of sectarian radicalism by mutual friend Stephen Edgington for GB News in Michigan and Minnesota. So the problem is only getting worse in American cities, and they're starting to resemble various cities in the UK now.
Yes.
So the problem is being made even more appalling by this, and I couldn't believe this when I read it. Man on terror watch list was released by Border Patrol, and one would imagine that if you're working for Border Patrol, if you had one job, it would probably be to stop terrorists.
The even more insidious subtitle is, with border security funding blocked in Congress. No, the bill did not secure the border whatsoever. It actually set up a sort of amnesty program. It was the equivalent of the, puppies and kittens bill, and then we decide to drone strike Iran over and over. I mean,
so this man on the terror watch list was an Afghan migrant, so again, could be in ISIS because it encompasses that area in which they operate in. And he was in the US for a year before he was apprehended by Border Patrol agents. So a lot can be done in a year if you're a terrorist. So this is obviously not good enough from the border, right? I think that's safe to say. Thankfully, I imagine because he was just released, I don't think they could find anything to suggest he was actually planning an attack. But one can't assume these days. And this actually happened. I actually dug down and figured out what exactly went wrong here. So this is a quote from the article itself. Customs and Border Protection released him as it would any other migrant without alerting Immigration and Customs Enforcement about possible terrorism ties. So it's just a lack of communication. It's garden variety incompetence, it seems. And yes, is risking American lives, which is unacceptable, really, because, of course, this whole problem exists because people are putting the lives of economic migrants above the lives of US citizens. There wouldn't be anyone coming into the country if the reverse was true. And the problem is getting even worse, in fact. And as the New York Post reports, more than 1,500 migrants from Tajikistan are known to have crossed the border between October 2020 and May 2024.
Who's funding all their flights?
It's curious, isn't it? I imagine they may be getting some money from
some NGO,
certain organisations, something open, something. I don't know. I can't make allegations, but so far, apparently, only 500 have been caught so far this year, and over the past 14 years prior, there were only 26 Tajik nationals crossing the border. So something's going on here, isn't there? Obviously, this seems like a very deliberate thing, because to go from 26 to 1,500, that's a massive, massive uptick, isn't it? And it seems like there's a concerted effort here to carry out a terror attack. I think that if things continue this way, it's somewhat inevitable, really, because the border is so porous that anyone could break in, let alone, the cartels that already exist, but people flying over to Mexico from, dangerous countries to carry out retributive, in their mind, attacks on the United States.
Well, so not to scare all of you lads here, but I have a source who has spoken to someone pretty in the know in the Met Police, and they said that one of the things they're most on watch for, that they can't really control for, is if one day 100 people in various cities just start stabbing each other at the same time because they've all texted that they're going to agree to do it. And the only thing binding those people together is a shared interest in Islamic radicalism. And so there's nothing also stopping the same thing happening in the United States, just to a greater degree. Because the only thing that would mean that it's more likely to be stabbings over here is the fact that you can get a gun very easily in London illegally, but apparently the ammo is the hardest thing to get a hold of. It's very difficult to import into the UK. But if they just buy illegal firearms in the US and they were to coordinate, I mean, it would create mass chaos.
Well, what's most concerning of all is that there could be an attack on US soil that will dwarf 9/11, and
in terms of casualty size.
Exactly, yes. because, of course, just the sheer scale of people coming in, it's not hijacking an airline anymore. It's thousands of people on the ground. It's tantamount to a military force, one could argue, that's infiltrating the country. It is a national security.
I think we need to mainstream the term unarmed demographic conquest. And I think that's a wonderful way of hammering home the way in which, because people have been conquered many times over, but very few people have welcomed their own conquest. And if instead of trying in a very overt fashion to exterminate the fighting male population of the people you're conquering, and to being outside the city gates with pitchforks and all that sort of thing, you instead psychologically demoralize the population that you're conquering. They will welcome their own conquest as progress, and that's what we see, and it's likely to bite many people, particularly in those very liberal cities on the behind.
Absolutely. So it is not just me saying this sort of thing. And in fact, here is Axios reporting the serious threat of terror attack, and former CIA chief. So I'm going to go through some of the prominent people that have actually said the same thing as me. So Michael Morrell, former Deputy Director of the CIA, has. Graham Allison, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Policy and Plan, basically says this echoes the run-up to 9/11. That's specifically what they're saying. And also the current FBI Director, Chris Wray, and Army General Eric Kurilla have also warned of a similar thing.
It would have been amazing then if you hadn't have sabotaged the administration of Donald Trump, who had kept the border closed and wanted to deport all of them. That would have been fantastic, gents.
It's worth mentioning as well that the weight of Graham Allison's voice should carry particular weight, because he's not one of he's a very serious person. He's written a wonderful book called The Thucydides Trap, which explores, I think, 14 or 15 case studies of war in the past, and where a rising power is in the process of potentially supplanting an existent power, and it's all about, will China and the US go to war? He was a pupil of Henry Kissinger's, and unlike many of the people who come out of the Georgetown system of international relations in the US, where it's all focused on people like Samantha Power, people like Madeleine Albright, where it's all about human rights, and it's kind of all very abstract, and it kind of post 1945 onwards, Graham Allison, like Henry Kissinger, has a deep sense of history. So that is a very concerning and sobering signature attached to that warning.
Also, we have other experts as well, and we have Fox News, I believe, report. Oh no, sorry,
next one.
There we go. Here's Fox News. Here's another expert here, and this is Paul Marrow. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but he is a retired NYPD inspector who worked on counterterrorism for nearly 15 years. And he says, we are in a period where a number of factors are combining to make a terrorist attack on the homeland far more likely than it perhaps had been. And he blames the US border. So everyone is saying exactly the same thing. And that seems to suggest that, well, they think it's a lot more likely. And some Republicans in Congress have been demanding an investigation because, of course, these 8 Tajik nationals crossing the border is obviously very concerning, because I don't think anyone wants another 9/11 in America, at least most American citizens, but certainly some of the people crossing the border, I imagine, are probably going to play a part in it. But there are lots of things to bear in mind when looking at other countries' approaches to border policy, because one of the arguments is the humane argument, which I actually hear quite a lot, even from people that are pretty checked out from politics, that, well, these people are fleeing war. Well, actually, the Western world is the exception to the rule. And if we look at other countries, for example, like Saudi Arabia, they just shoot people at the border. If you look at, say, Greece, the Coast Guards push them overboard and pop their dinghies. And, people know in other countries that these people aren't there to, build their economy and be honest. They're breaking into their country and they mean them harm. And they're treating them as such. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that we should, follow in those footsteps, but we certainly don't need to allow them into the country.
I don't think we have any duty of restraint when shown towards people who are actively committing crimes and want to break in. Actually, I think you should treat them as an insurgent force.
Absolutely.
And you're right in that other countries, including Jordan and Egypt, recognise, for example, the threat posed by the Palestinians, which no matter what you think about the Israeli-Gaza war, that population have a grievance against particularly Britain and the wider West for siding with Israel. And it'd be very unwise for us to let them in. And if they're neighboring countries who have a shared religion and
shared ethnicity,
and also a less of an attachment to human rights, therefore a more willingness to exert controls as the Saudis do, are unwilling to let them in because they think they're too much of a chaotic force, then the idea that we might import, 200,000 on a humanitarian visa scheme under the next Labour government, really bad idea. Not very good.
So it's also worth bearing in mind, on the Polish border, one of the border guards was stabbed to death by a migrant. So yes, he wanted just a peaceful life, didn't he? That's why he stabbed that border guard to death. No, these people are dangerous, obviously. That's why they're breaking into the country and not taking legal means, because they're willing to break the law. And if they're willing to break the law, who knows what they're willing to do? And it's people buying into this narrative that, we're somehow obligated to have this humanitarian approach, have probably read things like this, where they take a select case. I call it sort of human interest stories. The BBC are really egregious for this, and I hate it, because what it's doing is it manipulates the human inability to calculate probability and scale, and it just plays on your emotions. So it finds one example of someone who, is actually coming here with their family, with their children, but it's not representative of the greater whole. And I'm just going to read a little bit from this, and you can sort of pick up on the propagandistic way in which it approaches it. So it says, Ahmed Al-Hassimi stood on the beach, howling at the retreating waves, beating and clawing at his own chest, and surrendering to the grief and rage and guilt that would not go away when his, I believe it was his 8-year-old daughter, died in the Channel crossing.
He should feel guilty.
Well, I thought guilt is exactly the word that I picked out there. Why would he feel guilty? Oh, wait, it's because he made the choice to make that crossing. He wasn't fleeing war, actually, because the article goes on to say, and this is actually very revealing, although Ahmed is an Iraqi, his daughter had never visited the country. She was born in Belgium and has spent most of her short life in Sweden. As far as I'm aware, there hasn't been war in Belgium or Sweden for quite some time.
Been a lot of grenade attacks in Sweden.
That's true. But it's people like him, obviously not him personally, that are doing that, isn't it? That's why. And so he made that decision. He played a role in his dead daughter, and they're trying to make you feel guilty for us not letting them to cross safely, when actually it's not our responsibility in the first place. And if you had been in a dinghy in the English Channel as a British citizen and a parent, and you had a lapse of judgment whereby your child had died, you would be held legally responsible for that by British law. So we're holding a double standard towards these outsiders, which is suicidal ultimately. And it's not even terror attacks that you just need to worry for, because of course there has been the recent story about an illegal immigrant murdering Rachel Morin. And Trump released a statement about this, but I'm short on time, so I'll have to skip over that. But basically, this 23-year-old El Salvadoran murdered a woman going out for a run, I believe. And he raped and murdered her and left her naked body on the ground. So the safety of women in America is being jeopardized by the porous border. And it's not just terror. And, mother of a woman killed similarly pointed out rightly that it's Biden's border policy that killed her daughter just as much as the man himself, because that was what allowed him to get into the country and do what he did. And so,
similar to the Lake and Riley case as well. You've got so many of these examples now.
It's funny when they're not interested in those human interest stories.
Yeah, quite. Yeah.
It's funny, isn't it? Yeah. But my point is that this is something that should be on everyone's lips in the upcoming US election. This is a matter of life and death. People often talk about US elections and say, it's the most important one in, your lifetime. Well, if the choice is between, do you have terrorists, murderers and rapists in your country or not? I think I know what most people would pick.
Hi folks, thanks for watching. This is a clip from a broader podcast called the Podcast of the Lotus Eaters. It's live 1 p.m. every day UK time, Monday to Friday. And if you want to support us, you can sign up for £5 a month, help us keep the lights on, because of course we're demonetized here, and go and watch Lads Hour. Lads Hour is one of my favorite shows because it's basically, I guess there's no easy way to describe it than calling it The View, but for men. We talk about whatever we want, but from an unabashedly masculine perspective, and we have a great time doing it. So come over and watch that.